Today's guest is Emma Goddard, and currently she's in Amsterdam. She moved in this craziness of COVID back in March, so now has been in Europe for 8 months. She's been to over 17 countries, or 17 countries exact. I don't actually remember. And she moved for love. So I'm just super excited to hear more about your story, Emma. Thanks for being here.
Thanks so much for having me. It really is such an honor.
Hey. So Emma, tell me a little bit about how this all happened. How did you end up moving to Amsterdam?
So basically, as you had already mentioned, I moved here for love. I was in a long distance relationship. I was still studying in Boston and he was working in Germany, and we were doing the back and forth for 2 years. And I was coming to a point where I was about to graduate from college, and he was coming to a point in his current position that he wanted to try something new. So we were both kind of reaching this new chapter in our lives and realizing that we didn't want to be long distance anymore. So let's do whatever we can to meet somewhere in the middle, which, for us was either the States or Europe. And we were applying to jobs in both places. And because getting a visa as a foreign citizen in the States is really challenging, ultimately we had just decided that Europe would be much easier for me to transition to instead. And so he got a job first in Amsterdam, and then I had decided that even though I didn't have something lined up for me yet, I was just going to go. I was ready to move in with him and finally, close the gap in our relationship. And so I came here completely on a whim, hoping that things would work out, and luckily they did.
Yeah, I think the world there's something, I don't know if it's from a book or what quote it comes from, but basically the world will conspire with you, basically.
Oh, that's
It's
nice.
probably that. I'm not sure, but I believe in that.
Yeah, I think something cute is that for every like birthday wish or shooting star or coin into a fountain, every wish I've ever made, I believe that it'll come true, not because there's some magic being out there who's granting wishes, but more so like if you put out that good energy into the world and you're constantly reminding yourself of what you want, eventually you'll make decisions that help get you in that right direction, just by having that everyday reminder. So yeah, really for the 2 years of our long distance relationship, we were always fighting for the same goal to end up somewhere together, and we never lost sight of that. And we just made it happen no matter what, even despite a pandemic happening. So very glad I made it out here when I did, because otherwise I'd probably still be there.
And that would be so hard, so much more long distance.
So much, I probably would have had to get a job just to have, some sort of income coming in, and that just would have complicated things as well. Because, while having a new job, I would have always have had Europe on my mind. So I'm just really, really glad I made the leap.
I think that's great. There's so many stories that I hear where people's lives don't seem like they're going in the same direction. And even though they're a great couple, it's like, well, my career is over here or my country's over here, and then end up breaking up. But I love that it seems like for you guys, it was like there was no doubt. It was like, we're just gonna make it work. However it's gonna happen, we're gonna make it work.
Exactly. And yeah, it's unfortunate that that is the case for so many people, that it's just circumstances, and someone may feel more attached to one place and the other may feel the same about another. But the thing that made it so easy for us is both of us have lived in quite a number of places. So he doesn't have this one idea of home, as well as I definitely don't have one idea of home. So I'm always looking for new opportunities, new experiences, and so is he. So for us, it was like we had this list of maybe 20 cities that we were both okay with moving to. And that just made it so, well, easy for one thing for our relationship, that, we had a lot in common in terms of our interests of places to live, but also difficult because now we're not applying to one city or applying for jobs in one city. We're applying for jobs in 20 cities. And, what if he does get an incredible job in Singapore and I get an incredible job in Dublin? Then it would have been a little bit more tricky. So I think actually it was a good decision that I moved here not having a job, to sort of make that commitment regardless of what was going to happen for me in Amsterdam, just to trust that our relationship would work out and everything else would fall into place. Like I had prioritized our relationship more than anything.
Yeah.
So yeah, we'd actually bought an apartment before I'd even had a job. So it was really a commitment. Yeah. Yeah.
What a sweet story. And you said your guy is from Europe, right? But he's not from Amsterdam?
No, so he's half Dutch and half German, but grew up in Belgium. So he's a little bit of everything. And as a result, he speaks 4 languages. He French, German, Dutch, and English, as well as a little bit of Flemish, which is basically Dutch, but more like slangy. And then also a little bit of Russian. So he's coming from all over. But I'd say culture-wise, he might identify a little bit as more German than anything. But really, like location-wise, the world.
And I don't know if you mentioned it on here, but you guys met on Bumble, right?
Yes, we did. And this was 3 years ago when it wasn't like every single person had a dating app account. It was more like, this new up and coming thing that was working out for some people. So maybe, a friend of a friend had used it successfully, so you signed up for it. Now I've heard from friends, it really is like every single person out there has it. So it's just an awesome coincidence how we happened to go into this relationship, this very committed relationship, from a single swipe. Because as most people know, these dating apps work really, really quickly. You're just swiping left and right with maybe milliseconds to even process, a specific person. And I was originally thinking of swiping left on him because even though his pictures were like really cool, he was like scuba diving and was, just traveling and whatever, he had 0 photos of him smiling.
Ooh.
Yeah, ooh, indeed. And I'm the person that when I was teaching little kids over the summer in San Francisco one year, got an award for being the most likely person to be caught smiling. So smiling's a big deal for me. And I told him that, once we had started our relationship, and now I realize he is a very, very smiley person. He just prefers how he looks when he's not smiling, which I completely disagree with.
Wow, yeah, that could have been cause for me to swipe left as well too. I'm like, oh, this guy's too serious.
Exactly. Yeah, indeed. But no, I gave it a chance. And on our first date, we actually talked a lot just about our families, because our families, we both have pretty big families. He has 3 siblings. I have 5 siblings. And we have both parents from different countries. So we're both mixes, really. And as a result, there's just so much to like our favorite things, like so much traditions and holidays that you would spend with your family that's just you wouldn't typically hear from someone that you've grown up with your whole life. So yeah, we just had a lot to talk about for our families alone on our first date, and that was really nice.
And you said you're a halfie, so you mentioned before we got on that you're half Japanese, half white?
Yeah, exactly. My dad's American. As American as can be.
Was it a military thing?
No, he originally served like a religious mission in Japan and fell in love with the culture so much that when he had finished his mission, he had started his own like commercial production company in LA and decided to only take on Japanese clients as an excuse to travel back to Japan all the time. And on one of his business trips, he met my mom at a Christmas party, and she was this like 4 foot tall little Japanese like schoolgirl, not schoolgirl, but in my mind she was at the time because she was only 18. And then they got married in Japan, had originally intended to raise their children there because he loves it so much. She's so attached to Japan. But then his company started taking off and LA just made more sense to make commercials. So we ended up all being raised in LA.
Wow. Wow, that's so cool. I wish that I was halfie, but I married a halfie, so I get some culture.
Yeah, represent. Yeah, but you're a traveler, so you make up for it by just experiencing cultures.
That's true. That's true.
Yeah.
So, what were you always interested in other cultures? I guess what started that for you?
So really, and this sounds super cheesy, but it's in my blood. My dad's dad was a pretty famous explorer back in his day. I think it was the LA Times even called him the real life Indiana Jones. He basically is most famous for when he was 15 years old, he had set out a list of 127 goals. And, we all have goals, right? But his goals, every single one of them was absolutely ridiculous. It was like study Komodo dragons in the Galapagos Islands and be the first man to kayak down the Nile River, which he did. He was the first man ever to explore the entire length of the Nile River. And along the way, he had taken two British guys with him, and along the way, one of the men had passed away. I mean, about this trip in particular because in that one journey he had nearly died from hippopotamuses, from river pirates, from diseases, all sorts of things. And he's just an incredible human being. And he also spent the majority of his life close to the Los Angeles County, so I got to see him many, many times out of the year. So really, like truly, it's in my blood. It's in all of my siblings' blood just to have this curiosity for what else is on this planet. And I'm actually the least exploratory of all my siblings. So
Really?
so my four older siblings are also pretty extreme. They've lived in many, many places. And what's cool is each one of us has focused on a different region of the world. So I have one sister who's completely fascinated by all things Latin America. And because of her, for my first backpacking trip ever, we went to Chile and Argentina, where we just had an ethereal experience, dancing till the sun was out and yeah, doing all sorts of things. And then I have another sister who is still heavily passionate about Africa, and has lived in Uganda for a couple of years, meanwhile traveling around the rest of the continent. And then I have another sister who's spent most of her, adult life in Southeast Asia. So I'm the least really, because Europe, as amazing as it is, isn't really so much different in terms of adventure-wise than many major cities in the States. Of course, the culture is extremely different, but am I backpacking? No. And I'm working. Life is relatively similar in that sense. But I would say that for me personally, if I don't attribute it all to my grandpa, which most of it is, from a very young age, I wanted to study astronomy. Because we'd lived relatively close to the Griffith Observatory in Los Angeles, which is just a stunning observatory. And inside, you can, explore each planet in our solar system. And for example, you can see how much you would weigh on other planets. And it's really, really, it's just a really cool observatory. And I remember going there for a 5th grade field trip, and ever since, needing to know what it's like to be in space. Needing to know what it's like to see the Earth objectively. And so then
How old were you?
In 5th grade. So what is that, like 11?
Oh, okay, 5th grade.
Yeah.
Grade, yeah.
So then throughout middle school and high school, I was trying to study physics and stuff, but getting distracted by boys or whatever. And then I had actually decided to major in astrophysics when I had went to Boston University. So for a year and a half, I was really trying my best to do well in astrophysics, but it's a very difficult subject, of course, and it's a very solitary subject. A lot of the research world is solitary. And I spent many, many nights, in the basement of my dorm, working on a single equation for weeks on end. And yeah, I realized that as much as I have this passion for space, there has to be another way I can be involved and enjoy it without killing myself. So when I started failing all my classes, I realized that I'm going to have a change. So then I discovered science and tech journalism, which was the perfect transition for me because I could interview these brilliant people across the river in Cambridge, at Harvard, and at MIT, these professors and, you know, these scholars in all of these incredible topics. And just, you know, similarly to you, just, you know, sit there and just be like, wow, what, you know, how in these podcasts, you just like listen, right? And I realized I could make a career out of listening to people and telling their stories. Like that's so cool. So I transitioned to that, and that's what I did while I was in Boston. And yeah, that's for me, that sparked my need to just not only be out in space and see the world objectively, but also to realize that we're so small. We are unbelievably small in the grand scheme of the universe. And how in the world could we not at least try to understand this planet that we are on, you know, at the very, very bare minimum? You know, there's so much more we could dive into, but at the bare minimum, let's try to experience this beautiful Earth.
Gotcha. So I know you mentioned if it weren't for, if you're not attributing your interest, interest in traveling to your grandpa, that maybe going this route gave you your interest in exploring, right? Exploring other countries and cultures and stuff like that.
Yeah, more so just exploring this planet in itself. I never had like one specific culture that I was always fascinated by and needed to go to, except maybe Vietnam. I've always wanted to go to Vietnam. Haven't made my way there yet. But in general, you know, as humans, how we've adapted depending on our location and depending on the resources that we're given, how we make this earth work for us is so fascinating to me. What foods come out of certain regions because of what grows there, you know? So now I'm laughing because Central Europe doesn't really have spices. So I make fun of everybody here because whenever I cook for them and I make something spicy, some Asian spicy dish, they can't handle it pretty much every single time. But it's true, right? Like if you grow up, you know, in Southeast Asia, for example, where spices are abundant and you're a toddler eating spice, then that's what you know. But it's different in Central Europe. So, and every part of the world is different. So that's what makes me more curious than anything.
I love that so much. It's such another like different point of view. Because for me, it's always been about languages. I've always been interested in traveling because I love learning languages. But looking at it that way, like, you know, why people, you know, eat a certain way or are a certain way because of, you know, the conditions that they grew up in. That's a really interesting way to, I guess, travel and perceive the world.
Yeah, no, I mean, I get the languages thing too. That's part of it, right? And also within a country, you have different dialects just because of how the culture is in very specific parts of one region. But yeah, and the food is just one example, but it's just also how people think based off of what they've experienced. I mean, I had mentioned, I think earlier before we started this recording, that one of my concentrations at school was neuropsychology. And something you learn is that when you're a kid, pretty much up until the age you turn 8, you've already experienced enough to predict what your personality is going to be like for the rest of your life, to predict what your beliefs are going to be like for the rest of your life, because of based off of what you've experienced and what you've been taught and what you've been told by people you trust and are close to, that shapes who you are as a person. And it's very difficult to have a completely different point of view after the fact. Similarly, you can technically learn an unlimited number of languages up until the age of 8, because your brain just has such a capacity to take in new information and actually hold on to it. But above that age, your brain is so developed that you can take in new information, but it's probably not going to stay. So that's why it's just very, you know, children, right, is so interesting around the world. Whatever kind of education system that they go through or how families work there is dependent on, or is going to shape who they are as adults. So then as I'm getting older and I'm realizing how complex the world is, I mean, the older I get, the more complexity is revealed to me, but it's explainable. Because people think the way they do and they act the way they do because of how they've been raised and what they've been taught. So, anyways, that's just another part.
I love it. I love it. The neuroscience nerd is coming out in you.
Yeah, sorry, barely has anything to do with traveling, but it's true that and you know that's why I like to travel, even though I don't really make so much of an effort to do more of it, is because having conversations with people and realizing what they've been through in their lives so far and what journeys they've been on just helps me have a much more global perspective on topics, on every topic, right? So yeah.
Well, yeah, and I think it allows you to be more compassionate for people and more understanding, and maybe not so judgy of other cultures that do things that might be taboo, you know, here in the United States.
Exactly.
All sorts of.
Exactly. Hitting the nail on the head. Yes.
Now that you're in Amsterdam, obviously they probably speak another language. Do you speak other languages yourself?
Definitely not Dutch. The Dutch language is, sorry about that. The Dutch language is so hard to pronounce unless there's like very particular few languages that have those kinds of sounds, and it's a lot of like and you know, those kinds of things. And because I've never really used those sounds in my life, you know, people will speak to me in Dutch and I could not even begin to try to type out what they had just said, you know, in terms of just English letters, because it's just sound I've never heard before. So definitely not Dutch. I do speak a little bit of Japanese, also because I had mentioned that I lived a little bit in Japan when I was 7, and when I had returned, I was still, you know, before the age of my brain being fully developed. So I had learned so much Japanese that my mom actually thought, okay, well, my daughter's fluent in Japanese now. But because I wasn't, when I had moved back to LA, I didn't practice it at all and I had lost it completely. So now it's like I can have a very, very simple conversation with my mom or my grandma, but that's about the extent of Japanese. And then also a little bit of German because I was living in Germany for a bit. And Germany, more than the Netherlands, you would hear the language in major cities. In the Netherlands, in Amsterdam and Utrecht and The Hague, you really don't hear Dutch that much at all, really? Because it's so full of expats.
Gotcha. So you're speaking English most of the time?
100% of the time. I work for a Dutch-based company. Every single one of my team members is Dutch. We've not said a word in Dutch to each other.
Wow. So that transition and finding work, was it not as difficult as it may seem?
Definitely not. Yeah. Especially for, well, I was originally applying for jobs in journalism, so I wanted to be a reporter. And in that field in the Netherlands, there's not really, it's only local reporting. So that was pretty much primarily in Dutch. Then I transitioned to applying for jobs in communications. And if you work for a global company, pretty much everything you're going to be dealing with is in English. So that made it a lot more, once I made that transition, it was so much easier to find a job.
So tell me the logistics of it all. So you decided to move to Amsterdam. I don't know, did you get any sort of special visa, or did you just go on like the, you know, because we have the 90 days shenanigan, blah, 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 whatever visa. How did it all work out for you?
So exactly, I was originally on the 90 days tourist visa, but the craziest thing is that in Europe, it's so easy to move here if you have, well, for one, like a bachelor's degree really helps you because pretty much every job that isn't creative will require one. So that helps me a lot, as well as having an EU boyfriend that I could prove was not just a fling. So they basically in the Netherlands recognize long-term relationships as being on the same level as marriage. So whether you've been in a relationship for 1 year or 10 years, or you're married, you as a partner of that EU citizen have every right to move and be with them. So that's ultimately the visa that I went for. It's called the partner visa, and I can just from that alone, stay here for 5 years and then get it renewed after that. And to apply for jobs, that was also legitimate enough for the jobs I'm working now at. I didn't have to get an additional visa for that.
Oh, so amazing. I actually I interviewed another gal from that's living in Belgium, and she's on the partner visa, but she wasn't quite sure if she could apply to other jobs, outside of Belgium. I'm sure it depends on where your partner is.
Yes, so that's the thing is if you're going to have a partner visa for the Netherlands, you can only live and work in the Netherlands. And so then I guess you would have to get an additional partner visa and prove that you're going to live and work in Belgium if you want to do that. So I could not just up and move to Belgium tomorrow. I'd have to apply for a new visa.
Gotcha. Yeah. I joked, I wish Andrew was European, but he's good enough.
Is he from the States? Like, where are you guys living now, actually?
Yeah, we're in Arizona right now. We're actually moving to Costa Rica in January, but he's half Filipino. But his mom is from the Philippines. He's not from the Philippines.
Okay. That's awesome. That's super.
But at least he's cute, so
indeed. Yes, for sure. No, but it helped having a European boyfriend. I could not believe it when I had called the Dutch embassy and basically asked, like, what are my options? Here's my background. I'm looking for a job. And they said, okay, well, you can just get a working visa if you get a job. And then I said, okay, like, also I'm going to be living with my boyfriend. They're like, oh, you have a boyfriend. Is he European? Yes. Then you're set. And I was like, okay, do I need to do anything before I come to the Netherlands? No, just come here and we'll give you a few forms when you come to City Hall, and that's about it.
That's really cool. And your boyfriend didn't even know about it at the time?
Oh, no, the visa? No, he had no idea. No.
I guess if you're not in that situation, you wouldn't need to know.
Yeah, he'd never had a girlfriend that wasn't also European, so he'd never really had to think about that before. Yeah.
That's too funny. It's lucky too, though, that you can just go there and you can get that visa. Because I know for some things you actually have to go back to your country to get the visa, get whatever sort of visa, and then come back. So that's cool that you didn't have to do that.
Absolutely. It could not have been a more seamless process. I was very, very grateful for how smooth it was. Yeah. Especially, during COVID with so much uncertainty going on in the world, to have something solid and knowing that I'm at least allowed to stay here was really, really nice.
Yeah, so tell me about getting your job, because it was during this whole pandemic where a lot of people lost their jobs. How do you find that you were so lucky to get your job?
It was challenging at first, definitely because most companies had paused their hiring. And so I was originally applying to small companies because the position I was coming from was for a super corporate pharmaceutical company. Ew. And I did not want to be in a corporate environment anymore. So I was purposefully applying to smaller startups and, just up and coming things. But as a result, those were definitely not going to be hiring from March till July, really. And so that entire time, I had just put all of my heart and soul into looking for apartments while my boyfriend was working and just planning our lives for the next year in Amsterdam and what that's going to look like. And also just trying to keep my relationships with my friends and family back home. And so, yeah, for about 5 months, I kind of let myself be unemployed and just enjoy the city as much as I could. But when things started looking up again in Europe, and that was about August, Europe went totally back to normal, basically, because they had really taken the pandemic super seriously from the start. So earlier than August, even pretty much end of June, I would say, all the offices were back open, stores were back open, restaurants, movie theaters, everything. And so that's when I re-intensified my applications and managed to find this job, not because of a specific application, but because I had reached out to a Facebook group for Americans in the Netherlands and gave them my spiel and asked if anyone had any connections that I could have a chat with, and just any leads really. Wasn't looking for something completely solid right off the bat, but just a lead, just a conversation. And one guy, Ethan, messaged me on Facebook and had informed me that he'd already spoken to the head of communications at his company, and wanted to see if he would be willing to have a chat with some random American he found on Facebook. And the guy said yes. So we set up a call. I had 100% thought it was just going to be a really casual get to know you, hear about my deal, see if there's anything available. But it was a very, very formal job interview from the beginning, which I wasn't prepared for. I had never even sent him my CV. All he had was, a recommendation from his friends at the company, and maybe my LinkedIn. That was it. But it was a job interview from the beginning. And then I had 10 interviews after that with other people from the company. It was an extremely excruciating process, which took over 2 months because this was summer and Europeans like to go on holiday in August. So no one was in the office, no one was doing work. So I would go weeks in between interviews, and I was really interested in this company. So I was holding on to it more than anything. And before, just finding another job that I wouldn't be as happy with, I really wanted this one. So I just braced it, and I'm really glad I did. So I only started 1 month ago, actually.
Oh, great. And so were there other jobs then, I guess, that you were turning interviews that you were getting in the meantime?
Actually, no, there was one that offered me an interview of the truly 100 jobs that I had applied to. So, and that's without exaggeration. So that's why I had to take a break, because, when I had first moved here, I was applying like crazy, and then my mental health was declining. So I said, I'm going to take a break from applying altogether, focus on something completely different. And then I also went back to applying like crazy. And of all of those applications, 0 interviews, be it one. And that was for a nonprofit, which was had the same mission as this corporate pharmaceutical company I was originally working for, which is just to bring access to medicine for all. And that's what the nonprofit was called, Access to Medicine. And it had an amazing goal, right? And I really, really wanted to be a part of that. But it was so similar, ironically, because my previous position was corporate and this was nonprofit. But in terms of what I would be doing was very similar. And the materials I'd be writing about, and the diseases, even the diseases I'd be writing about, I'd already written about multiple times. So I just was really, really interested in a completely new challenge. And that happened to be fintech. I'd never written about finance before. Mm-hmm. And that's kind of what I'm doing now. It's a very technical take on finance, but it's finance in itself. And yeah, it's interesting. I never thought I'd be sitting here saying I find finance interesting, but it kind of is. And because we're a global payments provider, that means we work with businesses all over the world. And so learning about how businesses process payments and what kinds of like local payment methods different regions of the world use, like in the States, we have, Venmo and Square and all these kinds of things. And in Japan, it's 100% cash based, right? You have cards and things like that, but 90% of businesses depend on their cash processing. So it's very interesting how, different parts of the world work economically.
Yeah, now I'm interested. I'm like, oh yeah, everybody doesn't use Venmo.
Yeah, no, definitely. So that's cool, right? Because in the Netherlands we have the exact same thing, but called Tikkie. And businesses here have to realize that if you're going to be successful in the Netherlands, you have to be able to offer your shoppers all sorts of payment methods, because people are coming and visiting Amsterdam specifically from all over the world, and they're carrying all sorts of different kinds of cards, right? Visa is not popular here. Everyone uses MasterCard and Maestro and these kinds of things. So businesses have to think about like, okay, well, if I want to be able to offer my products to Americans, I have to be able to partner with Visa, even though I otherwise wouldn't. So our company helps to solve all of that by partnering with every payment method out there, trying to, that's the goal, right? Is having as many payment methods from every region of the world, so that in our one platform, we can present that to your business, whether it's a small business that only operates in one country, or whether you're Nike or Netflix and you're operating in every country. Whatever kind of size of business you are, you can use our one platform to process every payment. So, yeah.
That sounds really interesting. And you said that it's a communications job, and so you're doing a lot of writing, or what is it that you end up doing, and is it related, do you think, to your degree?
It's related to my degree in the sense that my degree is basically taking complex topics and finding a story out of it. Being able to tell this story in an easy way. So throughout my study, I was writing about AI and virtual reality, and oftentimes astronomy even, and taking these really, really out of the world ideas and interviewing people who had no way of communicating it simply to someone who'd only first heard about these random topics once. And so I would have to then sit for hours and research these topics, look at all these sorts of materials, go through the interview over and over and over to try to master it, to be able to tell it simply. And I do that with my current role. Payments actually is extremely complex. And because not only do you have these different payment methods, you have these different payment methods for whether you're in store, online, or using an app. So all three of those in itself have these different payment methods. And so it becomes so complex. And my job is to be able to explain to people what we do simply, and to help you better understand, so that if you're a business who might want to benefit from us, you can actually kind of gather what it is we're offering. As well as basically, when a company gets to a certain point in success and there's so much information within the company itself that your executives aren't even aware of the updates of their own company, because there's so much happening. When a company gets to that point, you need a communications team to help you for every single interview you're about to do, every single conference you're about to speak at. And so, like, if we had an exec go to TechCrunch to be interviewed about their Dutch startup, right? We would be the one to be like, okay, so in this past year, we earned this much in the last quarter, we hired this many people, we opened this office here, and we partnered with these merchants, right? And so you just prep them for everything, basically.
Gotcha, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So can you tell me a little bit about Amsterdam? So we've talked a lot about logistics and how you got there. Would you suggest Amsterdam to people? What do you like about it? What do you not like about it?
I tell everyone I know, I could not even think or dream of a cooler city. It's got everything except nature. So
really,
yeah, that's the one, and it's a big part of the only reason I wouldn't stay here forever is that you don't have close access to nature whatsoever. You have a coast, but the coast is not very nice. It's a cold beach. It's an ugly beach. So that's unfortunate. And then you have, this is, I think, the flattest country in the world. I think. So, the Netherlands, I mean. So as a result, you have no hiking, you have no forests. It's just agriculture all around. So that is the one and only downside, I would say. Other than that, I can't imagine a city that is so welcoming to anybody and everybody, no matter what you're into, no matter where you come from, no matter what language you speak, you will feel at home in Amsterdam. I feel like I'm selling it. Yeah, it's just magical to be able to take your bike, because everyone bikes here. It's like if you don't bike, it's really weird. And you just take your bike and you bike down these canals, and every single person you pass is speaking another language and is dressing completely differently from each other. It's not like you're cool because you're different. Everyone's different, you know? And I like that. I like that. I don't have to think about, I don't have to think at all about fitting in whatsoever. I'm perfectly comfortable with being myself. And that's something that never existed for me in Los Angeles, and also not in Boston. Even though Boston's very like academic and most people are just focused on, you know, their careers and whatever, you still have this competition with each other, and there's still just this need to impress, right? Same goes for LA. But here it's just like, even if you just have no agenda for the rest of your life, just chill. It's totally okay. We're just having a good time in the Vondel Park. Enjoying the sun or the rain. It's very rainy, but that's okay.
Yeah, okay for you. I am not the biggest fan of rain, but it does sound pretty wonderful. I mean, other than rain.
In Amsterdam, it's nice. It adds to the city when it rains. The city lights up even more when it's raining. Yeah.
So I know like places like, New York, they might say like the culture there is very like hustle and make money and like work hard, slave hard. But in Amsterdam, it seems like diversity is fine. Like be who you are. I don't know. Would you say that there's like a common culture?
Interestingly, no. I wouldn't say that there's a common culture. I wouldn't say that there's a specific group of people that come to Amsterdam. Unlike how, for example, Frankfurt, Germany, you go to Frankfurt to work in finance or to study finance. It's a finance-driven city. London is also very much a finance-driven city. And Amsterdam, I can't even think of one industry that dominates over another. It's just a mix. And it's so cool that it's a mix. But that's historically the way it's been, because Amsterdam was built to be a trading center for Europe. So it always had people coming from all over the world to do imports and exports. So it's literally built on the idea of it being a center for travelers. And that's existed to this day, for sure.
Yeah, I just got done reading a book from Paulo Coelho, and it's called Hippie, and a lot of it was based in Amsterdam, and it was about, basically all the travelers coming in and out. So it's really interesting now that I'm hearing that very similar, because that book was based in like 1960s or 70 to now you're telling me it's kind of still similar today.
Yeah, I mean, I can only speak from what other Dutch people have told me of how the history works here, because unfortunately I've not studied the history extensively. But it's also just proven in the buildings you see. I mean, there's such a mixture of buildings and serving all kinds of purposes, and no two streets are the same here, and no two people are the same. So it's just, and I could not imagine a better place to very quickly and in one single location meet such a wide variety of people. I cannot think of another place.
So for people that are interested in living and working abroad, would you suggest Amsterdam? Would you suggest any other place? And what advice would you give them additionally to whatever we've spoken about?
Definitely. Well, it depends on what kind of adventure you're in the mood for. If you are in the adventure where nature is speaking to you and you want to be one with the earth, definitely not Central Europe. And definitely go to Greece. Greece would be great. Greece is actually, under Japan, my second favorite country in the world so far that I've been to. But my advice would be to go with no expectations. I think with today's day and age of social media, we have expectations for everything, right? And you go to cafes because you've seen other people go and it looks cool. You go to Tulum, Mexico, because everyone's gone to Tulum, Mexico, and takes the exact same picture at the exact same acai bowl shack. And there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, social media is a great resource for finding these places you would otherwise have never known about. But if you do go with these expectations that it's going to be perfect, you just won't have a genuine experience. And I came to Amsterdam knowing extremely little about it. And every single day I'm learning more and more and loving it more and more. And pretty much the same goes for every place I've ever lived in, except for maybe Boston, because that was a very strategic move. But really, I try to travel with no expectation. I mean, it very much goes to show that most of the time when I travel, I don't even know where I'm going to be staying until the night before my flight or the day of my flight. When I had backpacked in Chile and Argentina with my sister and my brother, we had made zero plans for the entire month and a half that we would be there. So we knew that we were flying into Buenos Aires, and we knew that we were flying out of Santiago. Within a month and a half. We had zero plans until we were there. And on the first night, we went clubbing and we met this incredible group of people and ended up sleeping at their place for a week. Same went for every other place that we had stayed at, or every other city we had visited. We went because of a recommendation from somebody. And I think those make it out to be the best trips that you can have. You know, that's just how I see it.
That's experience, and I know I've had similar experiences like yours, not making a plan, and then it's always just works out, and you meet beautiful people, and just wonderful things happen. And if you have like everything set planned, then you might not have experienced something, I guess, had such a genuine experience.
Yeah, I can even put it into an example of when I was studying abroad in Dublin. I was with a group of students, and because flights using Ryanair, which is actually based in Ireland, are so cheap that you could go to Austria or Poland or Switzerland for €20 round trip, right?
Whoa.
And so we would go, yeah, it's extreme. Ryanair is a lifesaver. It's extreme. And so we would try to go once a weekend to a new country. And you know, I had made two very distinct groups of friends on my traveling abroad while I was in Ireland. And the first group of friends I had made just happened to all be very strategic in their vacation planning. And after we had visited together, I realized you guys are great, but we are so incompatible. You had already come up with a list of 15 monuments that you wanted to go see and 2 museums, and, you know, trying to rush to each thing that you've planned ruins the trip altogether. You know, you think you're not going to have a great trip if you don't meet all of the expectations you've already set out for that weekend. Whereas then the second group of friends I'd made were more similar to my traveling style, and those were by far some of the most fun weekends I've ever had. And yeah, so that's, you know, to each their own. But if you're going to try to experience a place, don't base the activities you do from a blog you've read online or from Instagram. Just go, see what you like, and talk to people.
Yeah, definitely. What's going to make the whole experience more richer is the people that you meet, not necessarily the monument that you saw too. So I agree. As far as challenges, what about challenges that you have experienced and might be able to tell people about when traveling or living abroad?
I would say that there are, and we touched upon this earlier, that there's personality differences depending on the different cultures that you're experiencing. And for me, a lot of the places I've visited are places I've also lived in. So I've had to assimilate to just have a good time, right? And there's culture shock all around. It's one thing to just be in a place temporarily and realize that despite how different people may be, it's temporary and you're going to go home after a week. But it's another thing to stay somewhere indefinitely or for, a long amount of time and think, wow, okay, this is a challenge because people think so differently from how I do. An example is that the Dutch have this very famous straightforwardness, and you or I would call it being rude. But for them, it's totally not rude to be like, oh, you look, or your makeup is everywhere, or in a work environment, it's also very specific. It's like, oh, that was a great comment, but you're not supposed to be talking in this meeting, or kind of thing. It's just a very upfront straightforwardness. They don't even think about these kinds of comments before they say it. They just say it to be effective and to get things done. Whereas in the States, we are constantly worrying about pleasing people. I would say is just maybe how the majority of the culture is, at least from my experience. Really, really trying to just be liked is a big thing that I've not felt from Dutch people here at all. They don't care if you like them or not at all. And it makes you feel a little bit inadequate at times, but you have to realize that that's the way it is, and you also don't have to like them back. So you almost make friendships out of not liking each other at first, but being so honest that you end up realizing why they think the way they do, why they made that comment, why they work on a particular assignment so differently from you. And then you come to respect them because you've been so honest with each other. Instead of just like tiptoeing around, you get to know people much quicker. So
yeah, I feel like it's like that the difference between the first date, trying to put your best foot forward, and then like, when you're married, then you're like, let's be real.
But yeah, exactly. Here it's like, why wait to be real? Well, just yeah. That's definitely the way it is here. And similarly for Japan. Japan has a very non-attention seeking culture. They try to remain within their social circle, I shouldn't say social circle, but they try not to bring too much attention to themselves. And that's, as an American who speaks very loudly, I had to learn that on the subway, people will be like, she's not considering everybody else who's on the subway, and she needs to be quiet. But they would never say that to me. They would just look at me like, and yeah, so every culture is a bit different, and it can be a challenge to learn and to not, we talked about this earlier too, to not judge them right off the bat because they're different. Mm-hmm. You're in their home for now. You're traveling in their territory. You should reflect on how to be your most respectful, or just try to learn how things work there, instead of being like, oh, you're different from me, so this was not a good trip, No, you're different from them. So
yeah. What about Ireland? Was there anything in Ireland that you were like, wow, they're different there?
Oh yes, I interned in Ireland, and on the first day of my internship, it was a Monday morning at 9 a.m. and I'm gonna butcher the accent, but I'm gonna try it. Some guy came up to me and was like, "Oh, it's your first day here. Well, we're gonna go to the pub and have a couple of beers for a colleague of ours. In a couple of hours. Does that work for your schedule?" And I was like, "It's the first day of my internship. It's 9 a.m. on a Monday morning. I cannot just leave and go have a few beers with some strangers I don't know." And so I didn't go. And then it was like 11:30 a.m. Every single person in the office had left to go have some beers, including my supervisor. And she had texted me, "Where are you? We're all at the pub." And I was like, "Huh? It's Monday morning." So that was a difference that I had to get used to. But Ireland also has a huge straightforwardness, but very obviously in a joking way. So, and if you can't, it's almost like you have to be able to tease back if you're going to be able to get along with people in a casual manner. You have to be witty, really. They're so witty. And yeah, but there's so many things about Ireland that I absolutely love, and I could live there for 5, 10 years. I absolutely love that country so much.
That's so awesome. Okay, so I guess just as far as last remaining comments, was there anything that you thought of before the interview, or anything that you'd like to share in particular about any of your experiences?
Some of the best travel experiences I've ever had are when I already said not having expectations, but also when I've gone and sat somewhere and observed people. Like, people watching can be so educational. And I think of one particular moment when I was in Greece with two of my sisters, and we had gone to Meteora, which is inland Greece, which most people going to Greece for the first time will just go to one of the beautiful islands because, it's what it's extremely famous for. But we wanted to go inland and see these villages of Greek people and learn about the history and the culture there. And so we went to Meteora, which is by far my favorite place that we went in all of Greece. And after a long day of hiking, we came back to the little square, the one and only square that they had in the small town, and we sat and we watched children just play. And pretty much me and my sisters were all completely just crying because it was such a beautiful sight that somewhere on a coordinate on Earth, on the complete opposite side of the world from us, from where we had been just days before, are these beautiful, happy, joyful children, as well as grandmas also sitting next to us, just observing them. And in that entire trip to this little village, we basically spoke like 2 words of English to the hostel owner who was handing us our keys. Everyone else didn't speak a word of English, so we would just point to something on the menu, hoping that it would be delicious, and we'd wait to see what it was, right? As well as buying tickets at the train station. Just okay, well, that is a cool name. Let's go there. And it's just yeah, that was just one of the most magical moments of my life. And yeah, just staying open-minded and trying to get out of your comfort zone. I'm actually a really introverted, shy person. I get told a lot that I'm really, really quiet. My current boss also just told me that I'm really quiet. Dutch straightforwardness. And but when I travel, I step outside my comfort zone. I step outside myself, and I try to leave behind all of the preconditions of my brain, right? All of the things I've been taught in my life, all of the ideas I think I have and beliefs that I carry, and try to see what someone else's perspective of the world is like. And there are certain human beings that I've never even said a word to that I will remember for the rest of my life because of just their presence impacting me so much. So if I can, leave it with that, that's how I like to see it.
There's 2 things that I wanted to comment on. One was the moment that you guys noticed the kids playing. It sounds like you guys were really experienced being there and being present, and maybe because of all these conditions, not being normal for you guys, being so far out of your comfort zone, you guys were able to notice something so beautiful and so simple. So I really love that. And then the second thing was that you mentioned that there was people that you didn't even speak to that had such an impact on you. There's some sort of made up word that I saw the other day, but it was basically that like you're kind of living like the center of your life, and there's all of these, like you're like the lead role, and you're like all these other people are in the outside, and maybe there's extras drinking coffee, but there's people that are also living their lives, and then you're an extra. So it's just interesting to think that that person, even though they were kind of an extra, they probably didn't know the effect that they had. Maybe they were a bit more than an extra. I don't know. It's just interesting to think in that perspective.
Yes, no, exactly. And that's something that if I had just lived in the same place my whole life, I probably wouldn't have come to that greater appreciation of, or that greater understanding of realizing, yeah, that you're not the center of everything. Life isn't just how you know it. It's also how a lot of other people know it. And it makes me want to be a better person. It makes me want to, whatever efforts I put out into this world, and I know it's ironic that right now I work for a fintech company, which has very little positive impact, so responsibly socially, but I do strive that the majority of my presence in the world I want to leave positively, because other people have done that for me just by smiling and just by being an example, right? And so, yeah. and I see how my efforts on one end of the world could maybe impact someone on the other side of the world one day. Like, definitely not right now, but one day I can get to a point where whatever I make of my life, hopefully I can positively impact someone I've never even met before. And I hope that day comes soon.
Well, you're definitely inspiring me, and hopefully, I imagine there's going to be people that listen to this interview, and they're going to be amazed, and you're already across the country, so you won't know these people, and they might not even say anything to you or to me ever. So I really appreciate you giving your experience. It's such a positive, wonderful experience, and I know besides me, there's so many people interested in living and working abroad, and maybe following their true love. Who knows? There's so many things that we've talked about that I'm sure it will inspire other people. So I appreciate you being on today.
I appreciate you giving me the opportunity to talk about something that really I don't talk about very often at all, especially because I live with so many expats around me, and quite a lot of people are coming from very interesting backgrounds, so I don't feel particularly interested. But I really appreciate that you're doing this, that you're opening up stories from people to inspire, because being abroad is the best thing that's happened to me, and it's the best thing that's happened for my relationship, and it's only the beginning. So if it can spark inspiration for someone to make that first step, that's all I could ever ask for. It's so cool. People should do it.
Well, thank you so much. I definitely look forward to more conversations with you in the future, and hope everything goes well for you and continues going well. I think it's going well right now based on what we've talked about.
Thank you so much. And yeah, same to you and to Costa Rica. I hope it's absolutely phenomenal.